Well, why don't we go ahead and get started and go through the normal stuff, and hopefully Debbie joins us here before we dive into the actual presentation. So again, Scott McCall, City Manager here at Sammamish. Again, want to thank you all for being part of the task force, and we're here in meeting number 2. Got a lot to go through, so I want to make sure that we get started and allow for the time that we need, and we promise to be done at 9 or before. So I want to make sure we get through all of that. I think just for Christine, I know you were there at the beginning, and then sort of had some connection issues and then had to drop out. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And maybe just a quick introduction to the rest of the group for, if you would.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Christine Collinette. I work with Innovation Realty Partners. We're working on the Town Center project there in Sammamish. My background is in environmental science and marketing. I've worked with cities in the past to help bring public benefits to the community and revenue. So I do have a marketing background more so than a financial background. So I'm hoping to add some value here as needed.
Thank you. And again, appreciate you for joining us. All right. Well, with that, I think we might as well get started. And I'm going to turn it over to Sam from Baker Tilly. And Sam is going to be leading us through most of the conversation tonight with a brief interlude from Aaron from the city's finance director. So Sam, please take it away.
Thanks, Scott. And Steve Toller extends his warmest wishes and regrets for not being able to attend today. He actually had cochlear implant surgery on July 11th, which is going to be a big benefit for his quality of life, and he was looking forward to it and very excited about it. It just happened to fall, so he'll be looking forward to watching the recording of this meeting. And
hello.
Hi, Debbie. Welcome.
You're muted, Scott.
Everybody on the city team knows that I constantly talk to myself and then get reminded that I'm muted and have to unmute and try it all over again. So apologies. Welcome, Debbie. Sam was just kicking it off for tonight's meeting. So thank you for joining us. And Sam, take it away.
Thanks, Aaron. And I'm going to be relatively brief before I hand it over to Aaron for a little overview. But before I do that, I just want to share a preview of what we'll do today and what's to come. So, last meeting 2 weeks ago, we all met each other. We talked about your charter, what you all are here to do. We did a very high level overview of fiscal sustainability planning and sort of did a municipal finance 101 and threw a lot at you. And we're going to throw even more at you today. Aaron is going to do an overview of the services that Sammamish provides and discuss a little bit about the city's current budget and funding sources in a more concrete manner. Last week we talked about funding sources and what they get spent on in a pretty general fashion, though mostly related to Sammamish. But Aaron's getting into details about what Sammamish is doing now in terms of the services it provides and where the money comes from and where it's spent. And then I'll get into a discussion on financial forecasting, what the current financial forecast shows for Sammamish, and then we'll talk about what fiscal sustainability planning is, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you'll be doing between now and the next meeting on July 27th, where you will. Prior to that meeting, you'll receive our report and memo that's pretty dense and detailed. So just be prepared for that. And you'll have an opportunity to review that ahead of the July 27th meeting, where we detail the budget strategies that we've identified through our previous work. And you'll have an opportunity to review those. We'll talk about those, discuss those in preparation for the August 10th meeting, where you all will then make some decisions about a recommendation that you would want to make to Scott in terms of those strategies that this group has a consensus on in pursuing to close the fiscal gap. And we'll talk about what that fiscal gap is. If we need it, we have an August 24th meeting if we're unable to identify and coalesce around strategies on that August 10th meeting. So that's today and what is to come. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Aaron so that he can give the overview of city services and funding. Aaron.
Great, thank you, Sam. So Mike's going to go ahead and pull up the slides for us here, so you can walk through that. So we want to provide a brief overview on city services and their funding sources as well. So recall that state of Washington, over 280 cities in the state of Washington, we talked about it meeting one, the typical city sources and uses. So we're going to get more specific to Sammamish. So part of what our services are is who we're about and what we're made of. So we start with our vision statement that talks about what Sammamish's vision is. And so this is our vision statement. In 2044, Sammamish is a regional model for an equitable and sustainable community in harmony with nature, featuring beautiful natural surroundings, a vibrant park system, lively mixed-use centers, connected neighborhoods, thriving local businesses, and active cultural scenes. Sammamish is a beloved place to live, work, and visit. So City Council established this vision. This is the vision statement from the 2044 Comprehensive Plan update. And as a strategy link to the vision statement is the goals. So we're going to work through the goals next. The first goal that's listed there is the goal statement that City Council has made for the financial sustainability. Of course, that's part of the effort that we're going through right now with the task force, ensuring long-term financial sustainability through efficient and effective government services funded by diverse and reliable revenue sources. Another goal statement is the environment, protect and, if appropriate, enhance the natural environment and address climate change through development of citywide policies, initiatives, and actions that ensure a sustainable future. Trust and transparency is also a goal. Ensure city government is transparent and builds trust with its diverse community by engaging residents in the decision-making process and promoting understanding of the city's activities through education and clear communication. So there's these three goal statements, and then an additional 4 to make up 7 goal statements that City Council has adopted. So here are the next 4: is safety, maintain a high level of public safety and build citywide resilience through proactive public engagement and coordination with community partners, focusing on preparedness, preventions, and mitigation. The DEIB goal is to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in a measurable way throughout the community and in the city's government's policies, projects, and services. Our housing goal is facilitate housing options that meet a diverse range of incomes and needs. And the transportation goal is develop a holistic multimodal system that equitably accommodates all modes of travel and is both environmentally and financially sustainable. So these 7 goal statements kind of are the guiding points for city services. So as we turn and we look at city services, and that's the next slide where we put this in the same type of format as you saw on week 1, where Sam was walking through the typical types of services provided by a city. This is now the Sammamish version of those services. And you'll note in this depiction, police services, public works services. So these are categories of services across the top there: fire and emergency, parks, rec, community development, administration, and legislative. And you would also note at the bottom that there's a progression of dollars. So funding priorities across the way on each of these categories of services. So within each of the general departments, there's specific services provided in those areas. I would note that both police and fire services for the city are both contracted. So fire and emergency services is contracted through Eastside Fire and Rescue, and police services are contracted through the King County Sheriff's Office. And within those contracts, there are more specific types of services provided of those public services. such as police services has the law enforcement, traffic enforcement, crime prevention, and so on through those different areas. So similarly for public works, there's different areas of focus of those services. And so each of those areas within those categories of services are specific service types within those departments and categories. So those are what an explanation of the services themselves. One way to think about these services is to group them or categorize them into 4 general areas. Which services are legally required, functionally required, required with adjustable levels of service within it. And 4th is the category of it's highly valued by community members and elected leaders, but is not necessarily required per se. So that's the 4 general categories. So if we want to look at examples of the types of services that fit into these categories, we'll start with the first one, legally required. Types of services in this category would be things like legal services. So there's different types of legal services that are provided. There's the city attorney services, there's a prosecutor's office, public defense, and court services. Permitting has their service as well. So building plan check fees, permitting activities. Public records is a service area as well for providing documentation and public records responses to those inquiring for documentation. Long-range planning, there's that service area as well. So all of these have legally required elements to them. The stormwater management, the note I would have here is, so we're going through the category of legally required. The note I have on stormwater management is legally required. It also has its separate restricted funding source. So stormwater management is through the stormwater utility. So if we recall from task force meeting number 1, there was this enterprise fund category. Stormwater management is housed in an enterprise fund. And so the separate stormwater rates that are collected and set for that fund pay for the stormwater services and obligations within that fund. So that's my note on the stormwater. The other types of legally required services, public safety for police and fire response. And you also have some metrics there just on the number of response for public records and stormwater. So there's some additional facts that are related to those service areas. So the next category, other than legally required, is functionally required. And if you think about this category, it's required services are necessary for a properly functioning city. And I would note this is not an exhaustive list. So these are just things that are examples in these areas, but things like finance functions would be accounts payable, receivable, payroll, banking, accounting, treasury, are all those elements there. Human resources functions, recruiting, retention, all those activities that are related to human resources, information technology, city facilities and maintenance, fire station maintenance. So we see a lot of the maintenance categories showing up here as required for a proper functioning city, traffic signals and roads as well. So the third category is required with an adjustable level of service, or LOS. So this is are functionally required, have different toggles or levels of service that can be adjusted up or down. Dials, I think, is the term Steve was using in week 1. So police, a certain staffing and response time, for example, a fire, if you're wanting to change or alter staffing and response times, those types of things are the levels of service that get set for these different service areas. Street maintenance, similarly, snow and ice removal. So all of these areas obviously have a high value to them from a service standpoint. And so can be, I think the term was sticky, to adjust those dials. You know, it's not an easy adjustment to go downward in your level of service adjustments, but there's maybe some possibilities in those areas. So parks maintenance, vegetation management, parks restrooms, permit processing time. So all areas that you can add resourcing for increased levels of services or adjust resourcing. And then the final category is not required, but highly valued. So these programs and categories you can see from this list are things that have a high draw. And so they're high value to them. Park and open space property acquisition and development. This one in particular kind of has a more of a capital element than the general fund operation piece. But there's a thought here that, you know, you can decide to seize an opportunity that comes up in the near term in order to get access to a particular park or open space. But that is a decision that has value in that moment. And so that's a decision that's made as you go along through time. It's not required that you acquire that, particularly for park and open space, but it is something that make a lot of good business sense to do and is obviously highly valued for the Sammamish community. Recreation, similarly, the recreation community events, human services funding, communications, passports. So you can see the list of examples here in this category that all highly valued services. And the other point here to make is that they don't necessarily represent a large potential expenditure opportunity here. So a lot of these things are funded at a smaller, minor level. So when you're looking out through a long-term forecast and you're looking for multi-million-dollar solutions, you're not likely to get that from something, as an example, lifeguards, if you change the way that you do lifeguarding. That's just a potential example to, or any of the other areas that you see as examples in this category. Particularly or some additional metrics on these as well has been included, just so you have some additional information on the types of park size, the miles of city trails. So this large area, large conglomerate of these valued services. Right, so those are the different categories that we were talking about, grouping them into. And then we wanted to move on to how are they sourced. So for the 23-24 budget period, you can note from this depiction, as we've talked about previously for Sammamish, these services are sourced primarily through property tax. So 68.3 million of our 115 million in revenue is coming from property tax. So this is different than other city profiles. So other city profiles may have a higher percentage of sales tax as a sourcing for their services. And you can see our sales and use tax is 18.9 million over that 2-year period. So that's the second largest sales tax, but is quite a lot less than property tax, for example. And a different city with a different profile may have a more even balance between their receipts on property tax and sales. The third type of usually is referred to as a third-legged stool is the utility tax, is typically a common source of revenue for other cities. So this slide in particular reflects our 23-24 revenue source picture. And you can see as you walk through that strongest property tax, then next is sales, all the way down to gas taxes, which are a restricted source of revenue funding coming through the state that have to be spent on roads. But they are a revenue source, of course, for operations. So that's where the gas tax sourcing comes from. So that's the revenue picture on sources. We wanted to touch quickly on capital because we've spent some time on the general fund operations. So the capital picture, for capital, we have 3 primary capital funds: the transportation capital, parks capital, and the general facilities capital. So those are the 3 capital fund categories that we have in existence. And then there's examples of what the numbers are for each of those for the 23 and 24 budget period, both in terms of beginning fund balance, the revenue that's restricted to those, the expenditures that are planned, and the resulting ending fund balance for each of those capital funds. This slide notes the type of funding going into those. So all of the capital funds have restricted use funding. So real estate, excise tax, and impact fees are the primary sources for transportation and parks. And then the general fund capital, once it's contributed into that capital fund, then it becomes restricted to the capital use of the general facilities. And so that fund is primarily funded from the city's general fund. There's not a separate revenue funding source for general capital facilities. So the other bullet point is noting the general fund reserve, and the general fund reserve is held over in the operating fund, and so it's not available to pay for those ongoing capital. That's a separate funding source for the capital funds and needs that are desired and needed to continue to fund those in the long term. So that's where we look to fiscal sustainability strategies to make that happen. So that's the capital picture. What's our slide? This goes into just a summary view of each of those capital fund areas, gives you numbers for the 23-24 budget and the examples of the large projects that are part of those currently budgeted 23-24 capital funding items. So in our general facilities capital, we're looking at renovating the Fire Station 82 and the maintenance storage yard. Those are the large projects. In the transportation capital, to give you a feel for examples in that area, Lewis Thompson Hill Road, pavement preservation, and Sahalee Way Signal. And then in Parks Capital, it's the Inglewood Fields, East Lake Fields, and East Sammamish Park Fields, along with a piece for land acquisition. So those are examples of the fund types and uses in those capital funds. And then I think I'm going to kick it back over to Sam to go into the long-term forecast discussion.
Thanks, Aaron. You can see what services Sammamish is providing and where those expenditures are, what Sammamish has to provide. What are some of those things where the levers, the knobs, as Aaron mentioned, can be turned? And those are things that you're going to want to keep in mind and think about as we continue through this process, because the decisions that you all will make and the recommendations you'll make to Scott may have some effect on the ability to provide some of those services at all or at the level that they're currently being provided. So now I'll get to talk at you a little bit more about forecasting, what it is, what the Sammamish General Fund forecast is showing, so that we've since updated with 2022 actual expenditures and revenues and the 2023 budget that's been approved. We'll get into what fiscal sustainability planning is and means, and how you all will go about making some decisions about that. And so, yes, the first meeting 2 weeks ago, this meeting today is going to be a lot of us talking at you, but then 3 and 4 and potentially 5 is where you guys are going to have, you're going to drive most of that discussion, which is why I will see you in person in Sammamish in 2 weeks, which I'm really looking forward to. So some basics. What is financial forecasting in local government? How is it used? What makes them useful? It should be noted before I get into this that a financial forecast is not a predictor of the future. It's a trend model, right? It helps us understand where we're going, so that if needed, we can make some adjustments, right? And it's not necessarily what will be. But so how do we use them? Well, we use it to help us make decisions, to help us make management decisions. What are the government policies we want to pursue? Can we achieve certain strategic goals? Again, it identifies those trends so that you're more ready to make some decisions about increasing revenues if possible in certain ways, or decreasing expenditures if the trend shows that you might need to. And it is really a key to that annual budgeting process, so that folks like Aaron, top of mind, understand how the decisions in the current budget are going to affect things 5-6 years down the road, right? And so that really helps promote the sound fiscal discipline. But it has to be credible, understandable, and really linked to sound fiscal practices. So, how do we make it credible? It's transparent. The assumptions that we make are solid and within certain tolerances of being accurate, because any forecast is really going to be as accurate as the assumptions that you make. We need to make it clear and easy to understand. And again, it has to be linked to sound fiscal practices. We'll talk some about reserve policies a little bit later. We want to ensure that it's structurally balanced. What do we mean by that? Well, we mean that ongoing revenues are linked to ongoing expenditures, right? That those two things are equal. And what generally occurs in government is your ongoing expenditures may exceed your ongoing revenues, and so you find one-time revenues to support that. That is not structurally balanced. Structurally balanced would be your ongoing sources of revenue aligning with your expenditures. And it's going to be linked to long-term fiscal planning. So, as we think about the assumptions that our model is based off of, we think about those things that we can control, and then those that we cannot, right? And so you can see what are those things that the city can control, right? You can set how much fees and charges are to a certain extent. Often you can't charge more than the service costs. You can determine how you're going to provide services. You're going to do it in-house. You're going to contract with another agency. You're going to share services and identify potential savings that way. We call it established staffing levels, but really it's what level of service are you going to provide, right? Because the services you get are provided by people. You can make yourself as attractive or unattractive as an employer through how you compensate your employees. And as you heard Aaron talk a little bit about capital projects, often the general fund will support capital project investment, and to what level it does that is within the city's control. So what's not? Well, tax rates based on state law, and importantly, in the case of Washington cities, the property tax rate that is capped at an increase of 1% per year, which is not going to keep pace with the cost of providing services at 1% a year. And as you saw from Aaron's discussion of the revenue sources in Sammamish, nearly 60% of the budget, the revenues in Sammamish are property tax based. And so it's a real drag in terms of how much the city is able to increase its revenues in that area against the pressures of inflation and of the cost of doing business. You can't, economic trends, we do and can incorporate recessionary impacts into a model, but we don't know when a recession is gonna hit. We, have an expectation of every 7-ish years, right? We don't know what type of recession that will be, or how big or how small it might be. We don't know how or when private investment is going to happen. We don't know when folks like Christine are going to be able to invest in development or put shovels into the ground. Travel and tourism ebbs and flows, and you see things with the pandemic, of course, and that's outside of our control, and how those can affect a lot of these elements. And so when we are forecasting, that's how we're thinking about these things. What can we control? What can't we control? But can we think about and make assumptions about happening, which is what we'll do with the recessionary impacts. So how do we get here? We'll do just a tiny bit of history. And there's a lot here, but to orient you, the slide on the left at the top, you're looking at the history of budgeted revenues, what the city budgeted in terms of the amount of money they thought they would bring in versus what actually came in. So you can see consistently the city is conservative in its revenue budgeting, right? And consistently bringing in more money than is budgeted. The bottom chart is the same for expenditures. The red line being what the city expects to spend each year and budgeted to spend versus what they actually spent. And you can see that, again, it's relatively conservative. And so what is causing that? Staffing vacancies over 10% for most of this period have provided many cost savings. And so the city is budgeting for there to be 100% staff. But the reality has been about 10% of vacancies. And so you're going to spend less than you think if you have that gap in staffing. That gap in staffing affects the projects and the programs that you can do. And so there were some programs that were budgeted but not fully expended or delayed, often because of those staffing issues. And so that's what has led to the bottom chart on the right that you see, which is the level of general fund reserves that the city built from 2017 to 2022 up to 50 million. But because the revenues were outperforming forecasts between 2 to 5 million, expenditure savings ranged from 4 to 7 million, taking the impacts of the pandemic and which city services may have been reduced or curtailed because of that. This gap in how much the city thought that spenders thought they would bring in grew even wider. And even with a sales tax being momentarily impacted during the shutdown, general fund reserves still grew, right, from about 28 million in 2017 to 50 million by the end of 22. But can these trends be reasonably expected to continue? And we would argue not, and that's because the city has really refined their budget processes since 2021 and 2022. And before I get into that, we should note that we'll see this later, so I'm going a little out of order, that because a gap exists now in terms of what the city expects to bring in revenues and the expenditures, they're going to have to use what you see here in general fund reserves to start to fill that gap with the one-time revenues that they'll get from transferring from reserves. But what has the city done since 2021 and 22 to refine their budget process? They've eliminated contingency budgeting. So what does that mean? The city would include contingency dollars in the budget. These are dollars we think we might need to spend, but we're not sure on what. And often they were not spent. And so that leads to an expectation of an increased expenditures, right? But you don't spend it. That's why from the chart that we saw on the last slide, your actual expenditures end up being a little bit less, right? The revenue forecasts have been refined. So we would expect to see that revenue gap in terms of what's expected versus what's budgeted to become more in alignment. Staffing levels now staffing levels are still budgeted, assuming full employment. So we'll still have, vacancy savings from that. You can assume there are still vacancy savings, but that is the right thing to do, to assume full employment and be conservative in that expenditure budgeting. Weather-related costs, we're seeing more and more of this in the state of Washington. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we are prepared for it, and we have mounds of salt, and we have the equipment and the people to go out and clear the roads, but that's not something that you all are used to in Washington, but may be occurring more and more often, right? And so conservatively assuming that those costs will exist and factoring those into the budget, that's now happening. Professional services, those things that you are hiring consultants to do or having outside help do, those are still conservatively budgeted because the city needs, in some instances, really to help fill the gap of the staffing vacancies. Really, and this is not unique for Sammamish, but property tax growth is not keeping up with population growth. And again, the state limits how much the city can increase, this council can increase on its own, the property tax to just 1%. And so the city has really, sharpened its pencils to be more realistic moving forward on both expenditures and revenues. And so we would expect to see those gaps that we were looking at in the previous slide to minimize. But really the core issue facing all of Washington state cities is that the largest revenue source typically, which is property tax, is not able to keep pace with the rise in the cost of providing services. When you're, as you see in the chart here, the red line is your largest expenditure source. It's personnel and public safety costs, and the green line is your property and sales tax average growth over time, and the average growth year to year of the revenues is 4.5%. You can see that the cost to provide that service, personnel and public safety, is growing at a faster rate. Aaron mentioned, Sammamish it can be and is in a way different than other cities in its over reliance on property tax. Cities with diverse revenue sources have more sales tax, right? They're more readily able to keep pace with inflation. Sales taxes often do, but on the flip side, when those sales tax don't come in because of recessions, there's a greater risk. But the story for Sammamish, the story for most Washington cities is that the pace of the cost of providing services is outstripping that of the revenues that the city is allowed by state law to bring in. I'm gonna now get into the assumptions that we made with our financial forecast. So what are the foundations of the fiscal model? Well, we use realistic assumptions. How do we do that? Well, we look at history. What has it been? What have they budgeted? What has it actually, what are the revenues and expenditures actually been for each different source, for each different type of service provider, each different expenditure category? If we're looking at personnel costs or services and supplies, we incorporate a placeholder for future growth and compensation, vacancy rates. So we make an assumption about what the rate of growth of those items will be. And I'll get into the detail of that in the upcoming slides. Our model, as I mentioned, does include and can include the ability to assume a recessionary impact. Again, the way that ours are built, or you can make an assumption about the year that it occurs and the level of that impact, and we do that. And then there are alternate scenarios that can be incorporated into the model. Perhaps Scott is feeling benevolent and wants to increase salaries by 10% one year, or council decides to, I know that Mike and Aaron would like that council decides to add more staff and provide more services, right? That kind of growth, and we can incorporate those into our model. Or perhaps this task force decides to pursue new or additional revenue sources, and we can see what kind of impact that may have on the future years within the model. And so we've built it so we can start to incorporate these budget strategies. We can flip switches on and off, and based on the budget strategy that is recommended, or as you guys are deliberating in the next couple of meetings, and you can see how those budget strategies may impact the city moving forward. And it's actually a pretty fun tool, so I'm hopeful we'll get to play with it in the next couple of weeks with you all. So what are some of those key assumptions that we're making? The slide details those revenue and reserve assumptions that are built into our model. Again, we are assuming that council is going to increase property taxes by 1% per year. We know that they don't have to, and that they could choose to not increase property tax revenue, but we are making an assumption that each year property taxes will be increased councilmanically by 1%, and that there'll be about a $300,000 per year increase based on in the levy, based on the historic data. We're assuming about a 4% growth on sales and use tax. Again, that's based on 2022 data. Transportation tax revenue growth, we're assuming about 3% per year, and that's again consistent with history. We're not assuming any long-term growth to franchise fees. So this is fees that are paid by cable providers, telecom providers, those types of agencies, and we don't assume any increase because of the cord cutting trend, and I'm among those that have cut the cord. Recreation fees, we looked to pre-pandemic levels and restored those. Our assumption is that those will go back to what they were pre-pandemic and then continue and grow at 4% rate ongoing. Community development fees also we're expecting to grow at about 5%. We will note that at present there is no. We did not build into the model the impact of any new significant development projects like the town center. And we did that for a few reasons, but mainly we don't have enough data of what it's going to cost to build to estimate one-time sales taxes, the size of the single family homes or the townhomes that are going to get built, and a potential price point to start to assume and determine ongoing property tax increases, though some back of the napkin math on the property tax impact increase from a development like that, suffice to say it is not large, and certainly not large enough to close or put a dent in the gap that the city currently has. We're assuming targeting reserves at a minimum of 10% of annual revenues, which is the council's current policy, that the city hold general fund reserves of 10% of annual revenues. We would recommend for Sammamish a policy of 25% of operating expenditures. Importantly, not revenues, and that's really higher than what the Government Finance Officers Association would recommend. They would recommend about 16%, but because Sammamish is so reliant on property taxes, we would recommend a larger cushion. But council has set a policy of 10% of annual revenues, and we'll have some charts that show what that looks like. And again, we didn't include any town center assumptions into the baseline forecast. So what are those expenditure assumptions we're making? Well, we just talked about increasing the city's largest revenue source at 1% per year. Salaries and other adjustments, about 4 to 5% per year, right? And that's your largest percentage of your expenditures are your people. It's the personnel costs. And so already you see an imbalance with the largest revenue source increasing at 1% a year. Salaries at 4 to 5%, 4% per year. And we do incorporate a vacancy savings into our model. So we will expect 5%. It's traditionally been closer to 10, but we'll be conservative. We assume 5% increase in healthcare costs year over year, and again, that's based on history and the current provisions in the labor agreements. The two of the larger expenditures for services are the public safety contracts with Eastside Fire and with the King County Sheriff's Office. We're expecting a 5% growth in those expenditures year over year. Services and supplies about 4%, which is I think what we're assuming with inflation. And I think we all saw the good news that this month we were back down to I think 4%, maybe even 3%. And I think I saw it was 9% this time last year. So I think we're all thankful for the inflation to come back down. We do assume about a $400,000 per year expenditure on capital equipment and another $1 million contribution to road capital. And those are both based on what has happened historically. And there's no assumption about the general fund supporting any debt service. The city does not intend to pursue debt that will be backed by the general fund. And so, really, the story, remains the revenue sources are not increasing at the same pace of the cost of providing the services. I think importantly for us and for this model, we assume that Sammamish is going to continue to provide the services at the level it does today, ongoing. There will be no reduction in the level of service, nor increase, but rather maintained at the level provided today. So with that, you now understand how we use forecasting and some of the assumptions that we have made on revenues and expenditures. What does that mean using Sammamish's actual actual data from 2022, its budgeted data from 2023, and these assumptions on that data that we've incorporated. So I'm going to orient you to these charts before I talk about them. The chart on the left, the red line is the general fund reserve balance. That's how much the general fund is holding in reserve. And we saw in the previous slide that increased over the past 5 years for various reasons. We don't expect that to continue. The green dotted line is our recommended reserve target of 25% of operating expenditures. The blue dashed line is the minimum reserve target of 10% that's been set by policy. The chart on the right is the general fund surplus or deficit, and so this is how much more or less are we going to be spending or saving if we do nothing. This is, and I should reiterate, this is if Scott and Aaron does nothing about the budget and everything stays the same. This is what would happen. That's of course not reality, which is why this is not a predictor of the future, but helps us understand those trends. At any rate, the chart on the right shows you how much the city is either saving by not spending all of the money it expects to, or how much the reserves may have to fill the gap. And so, for instance, in 2023, there's a $4.4 million gap between the expected revenues that the general fund will bring in and the expected expenditures going out of the general fund. And that 4.4 million in our model is going to be drawn down from the general fund reserves, which is why you see the general fund reserve line on the left chart tanking with sort of this increase in the city's deficit that increases up to 21.5 million by 2034 if nothing happens. Again, if nothing happens, they'll fall below the city's reserve, our recommended reserve goal of 25% of operating expenditures by 2028. You'll fall below the reserve goal of 10% by 2029, and reserves will be fully depleted without corrective action by 2029. And so, it's not any different than any other community in Washington state because of state laws. Those cities that have a more diverse revenue portfolio are not in as dire straits as others that we have a higher proportion of property taxes. Cities like Bellevue, who have robust sales taxes, Woodinville and their winery-based community and its sales taxes. But if the city wants to get out of this, really long-term issue of the limitations on its revenues and the rate at which expenditures are increasing, really needs to diversify its revenue portfolio. The city's going to need to continue to decrease its costs, which really means provide a lower level of service, or provide that bare minimum of service, which I think you all in the community don't want. I'm going to pause here. I know I haven't paused for a while. One, I'm going to take a sip of water, but two, if anybody has any questions about this slide in particular, or any of the ones that I've gone through before I keep soldiering on. Okay.
I just want to clarify while Sam takes a sip of water that Sam almost made me have a heart attack talking about 10% increases. So just you got to warn me about those, Sam, before they happen. Woo.
We won't hold you to that.
Yeah, super quick. Dawn asked why there was a surplus in 2022. And there's a couple different reasons for that. Aaron, you can get into the specifics of it, but there were two or three discrete pieces that resulted in that.
Yeah, Aaron, do you want to?
So 2022, I believe that was the year for the CARES funding. 2022 would have been federal funding, so you had some grants coming in there, as well as you had variance in your overlay program activity. So the sway and the up or down of that, 2022, you had that delay on the 228th paving project that moved from 2022 to 2023. So that's the larger of the general fund items there.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And to clarify for the rest of the group, the overlay program is actually part of our operational costs. So that's just sort of relaying the top of the road as opposed to rebuilding the road, which is a capital cost. So that's that overlay program is actually part of the operational budget.
All right, so this next slide, I'm going to sound like a broken record, I think. But again, what are those contributing factors to this fiscal gap? It's the imbalance in the revenues that the city is able to bring in and how much they are growing, right? Property tax, again, at 1% a year, other revenue sources between 2 to 4%, while we expect expenditures to grow at 4.5% or more. And, I think importantly, this model does not take into account the city's unfunded or underfunded capital improvement needs, of which there are many. Again, these charts, the one on the upper right just shows the gap between expected revenues and expenditures in our model out into the out years in 2034. The chart on the bottom shows the growth rate of those, and it's such a jump in 23 because of federal dollars and in expenditures, but you can see and as it levels off, right, we're expecting about 4.4% growth in expenditures year over year, but just 2 to 3% in revenues. And the little dip that you see in 2027, the dip that you see in 2034 are recession impacts that we would expect that would flatline revenue growth in those years that we've built into the model. So how's the city going to address the fiscal gap? Well, they're going to do some fiscal sustainability and some fiscal sustainability planning. And so what is that? It's identifying strategies, budget strategies, to eliminate the fiscal gap that exists that we just talked about in terms of what the financial forecast is showing. And we think about budget strategies, ideas that can be implemented to help close the gap in 4 different buckets. 3 of them are to maintain the current service levels, the last of which, and that we put last because it should be the last option, is reducing service levels. And so maintaining service levels, you can raise more revenue, right? And there are things that council can do on its own, and there are things that it needs to partner with the community to do. There are ways to pay for services in a different way, maybe not out of the general fund, or to shift those costs either to other sources or to share them. And then there's providing services in a different way, service delivery alternatives. Maybe you're contracting a service out that you don't currently, or insourcing if that'll save money. Maybe you're partnering with another community on providing a service. And so and then lastly, of course, reducing services. And so the budget strategies that you all will get in the memo that you'll be provided, that dense, robust memo lays out 17 different strategies that fall into these different buckets. And so this is how we think about those strategies. And again, our hope and our focus is that we identify enough strategies that maintain service levels that we don't have to touch the service level reductions, right? I want to touch just briefly before I keep going on general fund reserve policy, and I talked about the difference between what council policy is, what we would recommend. It's currently 10% of revenues. We would, and this is what we think about as we're thinking about budget policy. We would suggest that reserves are based on what you're spending, not what you're bringing in. We know we need to hold this much back because we need to spend it on these things. Reality is it's not a big difference, but it would be a best practice to base that on expenditures, and again, increasing that to 25% of the general fund because of the nature of Sammamish's revenue sources. For capital improvement, based on Sammamish's position, we would not recommend investing in new capital infrastructure without knowing how you're going to pay to operate it, right? If you build 3 new roads, 5 new roads, you just heard Scott talk about, at some point you're going to have to repave those, you're going to have to maintain those, and ensuring that, or if you buy new land to build a park, knowing how you're going to pay to maintain that and provide that service prior to making that capital expenditure. And we would recommend that council adopt a revenue policy, and that revenue policy is the 1% increase in property taxes is just a thing that happens. It's just what we do every year, because it's not a discussion and it's not a point of conflict. That's the policy of the city to increase that property tax by 1% councilmanically each year. And we would also recommend developing and implementing a citywide strategic plan, and the comprehensive plan and the goals and the strategies that were developed from that is a good starting point. Really using a citywide strategic plan to think about the next 3 to 5 years and the specific projects and goals that we want to achieve, so that as Aaron and Scott and their team are budgeting and thinking about staffing and thinking about the council's direction, they have this guide, right? And so we would always recommend having a plan that you're working towards in that manner. So we talked about the financial forecast, that there is this gap. Let's talk about how much money is going to be needed to cover that gap.
Hey, Sam, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you go to yes.
Yeah.
So a strategic plan currently does not exist? We don't have a 3-5 year outlook, something like that?
Not to my knowledge. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong.
That is correct. We do not have one at the moment.
And that is not uncommon that cities do not have a strategic plan. It's certainly best practice to have one.
But you have a 2044 outlook. So you're kind of thinking somewhat ahead, but this interim time period is not, I don't know, applied, I guess?
Yeah, so the 2044 is the comprehensive plan, the broad planning. And out of that comes, in a lot of ways, it is a guide, but then on the capital side, those elements will come up with capital plans that then are broken down over that 20-year period. And so as part of the 6-year TIP, or not TIP, capital improvement plan, CIPs, that's where you'll see the 6-year windows that are associated with. And then for the biennium, you try to fund the first 2 years of that 6-year plan. So on the capital side, it is much more planned out. And then on the operational side, different components of the city's business portfolio, if you will, do strategic plans. Some of those wind up in capital plans as well, and some of them are more strategic, but there is not an overarching city strategic plan at the moment.
I think earlier someone mentioned that some of these capital improvement projects may be postponed to out years. And as these capital projects continue to be postponed, I guess, or timelines are different, won't they be layering upon each other? Now you have a bigger expenditure requirement, right, in the current fiscal year.
Yes, which is part of the what we're talking about here as well, is that the capital needs, or we'll be getting to those, but capital needs do start to stack up, correct?
Okay, I'll listen to more.
No, and I'll talk just a little bit more about strategic planning. Oh, and mostly because I enjoy doing it, but it's very different from the comprehensive plan, which is, where are we going to be in 2020, 2044? For me, a strategic plan is council's guiding document for staff to execute operationally over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and helps align council's thinking and prioritization so that Scott and his team can execute on that. And it helps, from my perspective, it really can help staff keep council and hold their feet to the fire of these policies and goals that they've previously identified. When council wants to do a new project that wasn't previously identified, or wants to pursue a new, this new and shiny thing, and Scott has this strategic plan to point back to, say that, this doesn't align with our goals that you set out for us. And so it can really help focus operationally staff. And so that's for us why we like it. It's really a tool to help the administration. Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I just so we don't go too far, I just wanted to make sure I think all of us are trying to weave all of this together. In your do nothing slides, where it shows, we were all wondering when the crossover was going to be. It looks like it's 2029. Did that do nothing plan include the 1% property tax as well as the 300,000, or is that without the 1% and 300,000?
Yeah, thank you. The do nothing plan includes all of those assumptions that I detailed. Okay. So it does include the 1% increase and the $300,000 increase in levy.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just looking this way because that's where you guys are for me. Debbie.
I just wondered how many other cities operate with both a comprehensive plan and a strategic plan. Is that a common management tool among municipalities, and we're just behind the 8 ball on that?
No, and again, we often see communities that do not have a strategic plan, but yes, there are those that have, both a comprehensive plan that is much more longer term, and a more focused strategiip plan. And the reality is they should be in alignment, right? And the city probably has other plans that should be in alignment with the capital improvement plan, the CIP that Scott was referencing. And so from my perspective, you have this comp plan, right? And then you have a strategic plan that is in alignment with that and builds for that. Each, department, and, some of this can be overkill for depending on the size of the city, but each department will then have their own sort of business plan that aligns with that strategic plan, right? And so it's all about managing and planning the future work of the organization. But it's not uncommon for cities to not have a strategic plan. The city I live in does not have a strategic plan as much as I would want them to.
Sam, if I may, I understand what you're saying. I think for the group, council did set priorities for us prior to the biennial budget process, which is what we wound up setting our budget on. And that once the comprehensive plan work is done, it allows us to reset. I think Debbie, among others, might be familiar with also the 2-year cycle of the political process. Which is also part and parcel with the work that we do, is that can change direction in terms of strategic direction from councils as majorities change and priorities change. And so somewhere in there's a happy medium. Excuse me. And that's, so part of that is, how do you want to slice it up when you get to those points? So I just wanted to add that piece on there, that council did set priorities, which Aaron went through at the beginning, which the biennial budget that was presented definitely reflected those priorities for at least this next biennium, or the one we're in, I should say.
Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. And that, we often work with councils to do single year priority and goal setting, right? It doesn't have to be 3 to 5 years. And it sounds like this council has done that, which is great. Nancy is wondering, Scott, you're probably reading it as I am. Yes, I'll let Scott, you can expand on that, but
Nancy and I may have already had this conversation. So Nancy, I'll apologize if you're hearing it for a second time. Yes, as the city grows and matures, so does the investment in our infrastructure. So things that were built early on require more dollars to maintain over time. And then as we bring on new facilities, that adds to what we need to be able to pay for and maintain over time. I'll just use an example like the HVAC system at City Hall. That's a fairly large piece that only lasts for so long, and then you have to replace it to maintain the integrity of the building. So those pieces, that more capital investment is needed, not only to maintain what we have, but as the city wants to, and the priorities shift to what do we want to have happen moving forward, then there has to be a community decision about what that looks like and how do you fund it. So there'll be a lot of those conversations happening in the future.
all right. And please jump in if there are any questions as we continue to work through this. There's not a lot left, I promise. So as we think about the gap that the city has and what needs to be done to fill it, I'm going to pause. I actually don't know the answer to that, Scott.
Well, we do charge a business license for home-based businesses. And home-based businesses, if they are, I don't want to say legit or not, but if they actually file their business taxes, then you might see that. But I would say in terms of bang for the buck, I think, Aaron, what did we guesstimate if we tried to do a B&O, what we would actually generate? Generally with B&Os, you tend to exempt businesses that are under a certain amount, and that would generally include most of the home-based businesses.
Yeah. So this slide here details what is needed in terms of budget strategies, the amount of money either through revenue enhancements or expenditure reductions to keep the city above the 10% minimum reserve target. And it amounts to about $18.5 million in total, but that can be done over time. And so what this chart is showing is the assumption of about $3.5 million in budget strategies starting in 2028. And so that's $3.5 million of let's say budget strategy X, and then added to that $3.5 million of budget strategy Y, and then Z. And so it's not the same strategy, but it's sort of compounding on top of it year over year, starting in 2028, over 4 years, with additional budget strategies of a total of $5.5 million, about 2 per year, starting in 2032. And again, these budget strategies are either ongoing additional revenues or ongoing expenditure reductions. And so about $18.5 million, again, in total, starting with a phase in about 2028. When you get the memo, and I'll get there in 1 second, Debbie, when you get the memo that we'll have you review, we have worked with staff and through our own knowledge of potential strategies to identify 17 total strategies, and those 17 strategies equate to about $31.5 million. So there's options there to play with, right? And the goal for this group to keep the target above 10% is to identify of those strategies or additional ones that maybe we develop together. Again, about $18.5 million in their phase-in periods, and so it can be decided when certain strategies are employed during that period. And again, you can see that in the chart on the right, the blue bars. That's the dollar amount in budget strategies stacking on top of each other that need to be achieved starting in 2028 to close the fiscal gap. Debbie, did I answer your question, or?
Maybe I'm just going to clarify, make sure I understand. So are you basically saying that it would be this next 4 years that would be that phase-in period, so that by 2028 we've accomplished those? Or are you saying 2028 we start a 4-year phase-in?
2028 you start a 4-year phase-in, and so and like, don't get me wrong, you don't have to wait until 2028.
Yeah, I'm hoping there's some things we can do shorter term and not be, that's a little pie in the sky to look out 4 years before you're going to actually start working on something.
Well, and as you'll see when you review the budget strategies, it may be that some will take a couple of years to implement, or a couple of years to collaborate with the community on to achieve, if you need to go to the community for a vote, for instance, for something, right, to build that kind of momentum. If you start earlier, you can close the gap sooner, right? And we'll look at that here in a second. But yeah, this is starting in 2028 with a phase in over 4 years, and then additional strategies needed after that.
Right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. This next chart just shows the same information, but staying above our recommended 25%. And so numbers are just a little bit larger. The 13 million is the same starting in 2028, but instead of a 4-year phase in, you're looking at a 2-year phase in. Additional budget strategies, still 5 million. Can start a little bit later in 2033, also with a 2-year phase in. And so this is sort of the goal, right? This is what you guys will be looking to achieve in the identification of budget strategies to help close this gap. And I think really we're looking at about 18 million, 18 to 18.5 million in total strategies. And at the very latest, starting to implement those strategies in 2028, but by all means, start sooner if possible. Let's talk about the decision-making process for you all. And all of this information is going to be in the memo. I think some of what I'm going to talk about now we find particularly important. And these are the things that, as we are evaluating the budget strategies that are identified, what we think about and what we take into account in terms of whether or not they'll be feasible. And there are about 6 major factors we think about when we think about feasibility. And so again, and this is thinking about those budget strategies that are identified, and to take it out of the abstract. A potential budget strategy may be, and you heard Aaron reference this in relation to other municipalities in Washington. Potential budget strategy may be to implement a utility tax. Not saying that it will be, but it may be. Okay, so if I'm thinking about implementing a utility tax, what am I going to think about in terms of how to determine whether or not a utility tax itself will be feasible? Does it align with community values? And I should note these boxes from top to bottom is yes, go do it. It aligns with community values. This is, high feasibility. We can go do this. The middle box as well, kind of, maybe. And the last one is, this is a no-go. And that's going to be that case for each of these factors. And so we think about whether it aligns with community values. We think about whether it aligns with the organizational goals and policies. Think about whether it's feasible to implement technically and operationally, right? And so if I think about a utility tax, what does that mean in terms of how it's collected and how staff needs to implement it? Is that something that is feasible for staff to do? And so we're going to want you all to also be thinking about these things as you're evaluating these strategies. And you'll of course have this deck. This is relayed in more detail in the report that you'll get. So community values, organizational goals, technical and operational feasibility, timing. Can we get it done by 2028 or by 2033? Does it have an impact to service delivery? Are we going to be able to, is this something that's going to lower the level of service or have a positive or negative impact on service delivery? And then will it have a disruption to city operations or not? And so, some of them, like take our utility tax example, for instance, won't have a direct effect on service delivery. It will indirectly, because you'll bring in more revenue and you can continue to provide that level of service. But if I think of impact to service delivery, that's where I'm thinking about, if I decide to, we're not going to do this, but bring fire in-house or something, is that going to affect service delivery? Yes or no? And then, utility tax for operational structure and practices, it's not going to disrupt operational practices, but if the identified strategies will, maybe it's not something we pursue. If there's significant challenges that will come from it, if it's a moderate disruption or a minor negative impact to service delivery, maybe we don't take it off the list, but we realize a little bit that it, we just, all of these factors sort of pull together for us and for you all to think about in terms of whether or not it's a strategy that should be recommended or should be supported. Okay, so how are we going to do this? How are you going to do this? Well, first you're going to review the report that we're going to send you. It is probably not going to be immediately following the conclusion of this meeting, but it will be within the next couple of days, because the time is of the essence, and we've got our next meeting scheduled on the 27th. We'll want you to take in what you've read there. Be ready to ask questions about what we prepared. We have developed in this memo for each of the strategies that we've identified, some background about that strategy, our analysis in terms of the potential fiscal impact of each of those strategies. So again, when we think about the utility tax example, we will have an analysis and assumption about the revenue that could bring in. As you review the 17 strategies that we've identified, and again, we did that by talking to City of Sammamish staff and having those conversations with people that provide those services. Our team was full of former city managers, former directors of various city departments, right, with knowledge of potential strategies and ways to deliver service. And so, but we by no means have built potentially an exhaustive list of strategies. And so, are there any ones that we didn't include that you all would want to bring to the table that should be addressed? And then really start to think about those strategies that you'd be in favor of recommending. And that's that next meeting in 2 weeks is where we'll have this discussion about the strategies and really start to think about how we are going to come to how this group is going to come to consensus. Christine, I'll get to you. We are happy to offer our suggestions to you all in terms of ways for this group to come to consensus about the strategies that you may want to recommend to Scott. But we would encourage you all as a group to think about and maybe determine how you want to come to that consensus. And so as you're looking through those strategies in the report, do also think about if you have ideas for how this group might come to agreement and consensus on the strategies to recommend. Again, we've done this a couple of times before, 4 or 5 times before, with various cities in Washington and California, and have some ideas we can bring to the table. But this is your task force, and so we want to give you that space to, if you have thoughts on how to come to consensus, rather than telling you how you're going to come to consensus. Christine.
Will state or federal funding mechanisms be a part of what we might see in these budget strategies?
So there are no state or federal funding mechanisms in our budget strategies because those are often one-time sources of revenue, and the strategies that you all will want to identify and that we would want you all to recommend are ongoing, right? Stuff that it's going to continue to come into the city so that they can achieve the structural balance that we talked about earlier.
Thank you.
This is where I'm going to go to the slide that has my contact information and say thank you, and that's all I have for today. Again, you're going to have this slide deck. We're going to send you the report shortly after this meeting. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, I think questions should come through us, and then back through you to the task force so that everybody is getting the same information. But we would encourage over the next couple of weeks after you receive the report, and if you have any questions about it, that you either don't want to save for the task force meeting on the 27th, or that we can maybe come prepared to answer at the task force meeting on the 27th, just send those through Mike to us, and we'll be happy to provide any responses back to the full task force about that. Yes, John?
Yes, in your modeling, I think you go back to only 2017. I would like to see the history of revenues and expenditures from the beginning of the city, which is 24 years, to better understand how we arrived at where we are now. I think Aaron can give us, for example, the capital expenditures year by year from the beginning. Would love to see, for example, fire expenditures and EFR expenditures being the 2 major expenditures from the beginning. And see, I know over the years we had this crossover point always in front of us 5 or 6 years, and we never crossed over. So, you know, well, for example, legal, I know we've had a lot of extra legal in the last few years. I'd like to see legal expenditures broken down from the beginning. If we can see the individual history of these different expenditures and the different revenues, we can better understand where there might be places that savings can be made. And the other question I had was actually on your reserve policy of 25%. You said because of our source of revenue being property tax, you would have a larger reserve. It would seem to me you'd have a smaller reserve because the property tax is such a stable revenue.
Stable, but not growing at the pace that it needs to, right, Don? And so if there were more varied revenue sources, the need for that level of reserves wouldn't be as high, which is why we recommend the 25%.
If I could follow up on what Sam said previously, if you have questions, please do send them in and we will try to answer what we can ahead of time and get them out to everybody. I think it's always helpful for other folks to see the questions and the answers, because in general, if someone has them, my guess is that a lot of other people do as well. So I think those are super helpful. I will say, Dawn, I appreciate your request. I think one of the things that we really want to try to focus on here is the actual functional what we do, as opposed to trying to go down and deep dive to get at whether it is level of service or whether it is do we do an actual line of business or not. I think that's kind of the level of where the task force is in terms of when you're making these decisions that Sam is going to put in front of you. I think that's where this types of thing fall. It's either that we adjust the level of service on what we do, or we don't do a service, and then the subsequent costs and associated costs and stuff like that will go with that. But I think that's the piece that we're looking for community input on. What is the right level? And just as an example, council just went through looking at snow and ice removal level of service. And at the end of the day, it's not a ton of money, but that's the pieces where you could say, we could do more, we could do less. There are costs associated with that. And they are ongoing because we budget year over year for snow and ice removal, just as an example. And I think that's one of those pieces that we're trying to get a sense from this group, depending on what the levers are, what you want to do based on our service delivery model. And I see Michael's hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And yeah, I understand getting that data, I just think would help us all. I have a different question, and it's to Sam around, if I had the deck in front of me, I could flip back and ask the question, but since I don't, let me see if I can do this for you. When you were looking at the total revenue of 115 million from all those different sources, and you were looking at how we're going to cross the line, was that just a general fund, or was that total OpEx and CapEx? Is that all of it, or was that just a general fund dropping?
Just the general fund, and just to make sure that we're all on the same page. That's this slide, right, Michael?
Yeah, exactly. And I was just wondering, so does our task have anything to do with capital funding? Because some of that comes from that 115 million or the general fund, or is that just not part of our purview? Are we just looking at general fund questions?
So the focus of this task force and the fiscal sustainability planning will be on just the general fund, and with an assumption currently that the general fund won't be increasing its support for capital project needs, and there are unmet capital infrastructure and capital project needs, but the city at the moment will not be diverting its general fund reserves to capital projects because it needs to use those reserves to fill the operating budget gap that we see here in the general fund.
Got it. So if you have 100, maybe I'm doing the math wrong back in your prior slide, but if you have 115 million and your actuals are like at 55 million for, you know, the operating, that's 60 million. Does that go into capital? And we don't, who made that decision? Was that the council?
I think you might be referencing the slide Aaron showed with the
Yeah,
yeah.
where all the revenue comes from. Yeah.
Right. Aaron, do you want to?
Yeah, keep in mind the 115 million is a 2-year number.
Oh, it's a 2-year number.
Yeah,
Oh,
so it's 23-24 budget. So
okay.
the forecast is going annual. This one is a
That's-
2-year, 23-24.
That's 2 years. Okay, it's not just a fiscal 23-24. It's actually, is it
So
fiscal 23 and fiscal 24? I don't know if you guys work on calendar.
yes,
Okay.
we're a biennial budget, so it's a
Okay.
2-year budget. And so that's why it's grouped into 2 years together there.
Got it, Aaron. Okay, that answers my question. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thanks, Sam.
Are there any questions about what is coming after this meeting and the expectations for the meeting when we all get together in person on the 27th?
There's one. Are the rating of whether a proposal, you know, is going to within the current plan or be close to getting some public support or being a problem, are those ratings, I'm just paraphrasing that slide, but are those, have you already kind of made the value judgments about the different alternatives?
Our team has made a judgment, but that's our team's judgment, right? And so, you know, we would totally expect you all to make your own separate judgment about those, and we use those factors and those feasibility factors just as a framework, right, for us to think about whether or not it will have what we describe as a high, low, or moderate potential for success for that particular budget strategy. And so that's in our memo for each of the strategies that we identified. But you all may think differently than we do, and that's, you know, I think we would expect that.
Right, yeah, certainly we don't know whether your staff have the capacity to do it currently, or would it require some change in organization. Those kinds of things would take more feedback from you.
Yeah, and we'll provide that. You know, I would add that the strategies that we strive when we present these strategies to suggest those that are implementable. Julie?
Yeah, I am curious about the format of the next meeting, you know, assuming everyone has read the materials and we've asked questions, what was the format going to be like?
Yeah, so it's an open discussion. We will likely, you know, after you all have had a chance to review the document, we will still then on our end go through each of the budget strategies so you can hear from us directly about them. Maybe that'll answer some of your questions. So there'll be a portion of that meeting where we are reviewing each of those 17 budget strategies, giving you all an opportunity to hear from each other, right? Maybe a little bit about how you feel about certain budget strategies, and it's really the sort of stage setting of everybody being on the same page and understanding about what the strategy is and what the potential impact of the strategy might be. Maybe somebody raises their hand and says, that's not something I would ever go for. Hopefully we don't have that. We need to, you know, try to keep everything on the table, but that's good information for you all as a group to know from each other, right? And so that you can really be prepared as we head into the meeting on August 10th to make some hard choices in that meeting together as a group about what are those strategies that that we would recommend to Scott, recommend to council, or not. And so, you know, it's getting on the same page. It's having that initial conversation, and you know, it's one thing to read this document that we wrote. It's another thing to hear it from us, right? So you'll have that opportunity, and then hear from each other about what you think. Larry, and then Nancy.
Yes. Wanted to just say something, and I hope this is positive. And I have trouble separating capital projects, but it seems like improvement of the infrastructure would also be classified as prevention of future problems. So I don't know how that's going to fit in, but it might be with the vision of Sammamish, you know, looking at that infrastructure. Okay.
Thank you for that, Larry. And you know, I think what one way to think about it right now, the forecast, our assumptions are that the city will spend $400,000 a year on capital equipment replacements or purchases, and that the city is contributing about $1 million a year for road capital improvements. That's already assumed, right? So about 1.4 in capital and nothing else. Finding strategies that go above and beyond the 18.5 million, or you know, the 13 starting in 28, and anything above and beyond that is dollars that the general fund can then transfer to capital projects, right? And so when we say you need, you know, this many dollars starting in this year over and phasing it in over this number of years, that is just to keep or get the general fund to be to have to keep its revenues and expenditures in alignment. Anything above and beyond that can go towards transfers to capital, and maybe something you all want to think about. Nancy. Nancy, you're muted.
I'm sorry. What I understand was we go through this report with the 17 different strategies, we're supposed to identify $18.5 million in money that we could allocate. Is that correct?
That will be the ultimate goal.
Okay. Could you give us CHIT? Do you know what that, CHIT? Do you know what that is?
I don't know what CHIT is. That's new.
CHIT is like a 5 pieces or 10 pieces that we each could have to pick our own, so we could sort of do, I mean, we're going to have a discussion, right? But that might set the groundwork for some kind of discussion of each person has the responsibility in their own mind with 10 CHIT or 5 CHIT to pick their 5 top strategies. It might organize the discussion a little better and force everyone to make some decisions. Am I communicating?
You are. So in that, this is great, Nancy. So you know, what I'm hearing Nancy say is one way that you all can work together to start to think about strategies that you would have consensus on is to start thinking about those top 5 or more, right, that you're in favor of. And so and hopefully I'm reflecting that right, Nancy. Right. But we will likely not get into that part of the conversation in the next meeting, or if we do, it'll be at the end. But I like where Nancy is already thinking, so that you all can decide as a group how to get to that 18.5. And so, you know, I hear one idea to do that potentially is to think about those top 5, you know, from Nancy. And so I think for me, what would be awesome, in addition to thinking about and coming with your questions on the strategies, is also thinking about, again, how you're going to come to consensus as a group. And I would love at the end of the meeting on the 27th that there's some framework that you all have identified to do that. And we've, again, I think for now, I want you all to think about those ideas. And so Nancy, hold that and maybe think about more in additional ways to get there. We'll hear from you all and start to develop that plan at the end of the meeting on the 27th. And if you need any suggestions from us or advice, and of course we'll facilitate that conversation. But if you say, how would you do it, or how have you done it in other places, we'll be happy to share that with you. And if that's something that you guys would want to pursue, you could do that as well. Does that help, Nancy?
I just think this is going to be hard. And so if we're forced to pick some things, everybody's forced to pick some things, it will expedite the discussion. I don't want a 3-hour session devolved into, big topics. We're not reaching any progress. I want us to be forced to make some decisions. Am I being too aggressive there?
No, from my perspective, no. Right? I mean, because eventually, right, you're all gonna need to say, I think, at some point on the 17 strategies, yes, no, or I don't love it, but I don't dislike it enough to say no, right? And so I think we've seen that sort of used in places, and then from your all's individual, let's call it rankings of those strategies in those different categories. Where's their alignment? Where's the disalignment? If there's
Right.
alignment on 18.5 million, then awesome, right? And then if not, how do you all decide between each other for those things that are either no's or not a no, but not a yes, to pursue and move forward to recommend to Scott. And so, that consensus that you'll need to get to is going to be hard. Scott?
I was just going to say, I think the memo, while long, is really well laid out, and I think it'll become a little clearer once you get it and start reading through it. That those different strategies and things like that, they become pretty clear, and you'll have a pretty good sense, I think, when you read them about, does this resonate with me or not? And I think it'll be, yes, you all have hard decisions to make in the same way that so do I, and so does council when we get to that point about what they're going to do. And I think that's part of having you all go through this, is in no small part at some point in time, these are value statements that you all are coming to the table with. And that's why we wanted to hear from the community as part of this, because the entire budget is a value statement at the end of the day. While some things are required, as Aaron pointed out, really, this is the community values that the services that you have today are based on community values. And so that's why in thinking about this and thinking about what you might want to do, whether it is to raise or reduce or some combination thereof, is based around how do you value the services that are being provided. And I think the memo will really lay that out for all of you. And so I would say I understand a little bit of confusion now. I think once you get it, it'll become clearer. And then if there are questions about how it's supposed to work, I think let's get those out up front. But I think once you get there, you all will have at least an easier time having the discussion. The decision points are still going to be hard for sure. I have a very important question for the next meeting, which is in person. Thumbs up for those snacks and some version of drinks available for folks. Is that something that would be helpful? Yeah. Okay. We'll make sure to have something. I know, these meetings are long, and when you're at home, you can grab your own stuff, but you're going to be joining us here. We appreciate it. So we'll get something pulled together. So anyway, Sam and his team have done a great job with the memo. And when you see it, you'll appreciate and understand where they're headed with that, how it's broken down and what those optionalities are. And really that grading scale, it's pretty clear. the criteria, Sam lays it all out, but when you see it, you'll say, oh, that makes sense. You might not like that strategy, but you'll understand why it's either a high or a medium or a low, depending on their analysis of it.
With that, and if you don't have any questions, Debbie,
I was just saying, I'm looking forward to getting in. So, yeah, thanks for the outline.
like I said, we will strive to get you that memo as quickly as possible within the next couple of days, and give you as much time as we can with it, and send any questions you have through Mike. We'll get them answered. Scott, can we close this out? I don't know if I have anything else.
No, that's great. Appreciate it, Sam. Again, thank you all so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. The presentations or presentation will be on the website. Mike might have already done it because he's that good. And then we'll get that memo out to you ASAP. So everything should be available. The recording of this meeting will be up as soon as we get it finalized, and we'll put it up on the finance page website that has the FSP on it. I will get that wrong every time, so my apologies. And then the memo we'll email it out to you. We'll also put it on the website. So if you can't find it for some reason, you'll be able to go to the website and grab it as well. With that, that's everything we have for tonight. So thank you all so much, and the sun is still out, so please go enjoy.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.